Hello guys and gals, me Mudahar, and welcome to another episode of Haunted Gaming, the series where you take a look at the darker, mysterious side of video gaming in general. Now remember how I covered Concluse a while ago, the PS1 ARG that I basically called out on its technical quirks and really looked at scrupulously. I looked at the story over there. It was an interesting little ARG, and it seems like it's continuing as time is going on, but today we're going to look at a much more popular ARG, one ARG that's covered by a lot of people, one that has spawned its own introspective community behind it. You can go to Reddit, entirely look at a full subreddit of these people analyzing Petscop on a daily basis. You can go to wikis where you cover just theories upon theories and mentionings of and cataloging of various different aspects of this arc. Now, this belongs to the channel Petscop out here on YouTube, which actually began on the 11th of March this year. Now, this game is claimed to be delivered from an entity called, or an individual called Rainer, who had apparently gone missing, sent to a narrator known as Paul. Now, right now, at this moment in time, as of this recording, as of the upload, the ARG actually spans about 10 total episodes, with about an 11th one and beyond coming as time goes on. Now, the videos themselves are about 11 minutes long, so they're much longer than the ones typically attributed to the Concluse ARG, and alongside that, they do have much more in story coming along inside them than Concluse really had going for it. Now, compared to that, this ARG is depicted more legitimately, things like resolutions, frame interpolation, video interpolation. It's very much a PS1 looking game. And it has an element of commentary that's also provided by the ARG creator themselves, Paul, who we're going to be referencing here, the narrator, to really lead us through the story in this situation. Now again, this is a very popular ARG. A lot of big channels have covered this, a lot of wikis are cataloging every single event, a lot of theories are coming around to it, and it does connect to a much more darker overtone, darker element of our world as we dig further into it. Now, as far as the introduction to this goes, I don't think there's much more to be said. I think it all boils down to analyzing first what these 10 videos contain, looking at them through a cursory glance, and then looking at them in a much more in-depth analysis towards the end of the video. So I think a lot similar to how we did Concluse. That being said, let's go in and see just exactly what this ARG really is all about. So let's go see what these 10 episodes have. Video 1 begins with a PlayStation logo and a company known as Garalina. The videos appear to be narrated by the ARG creator, Paul. The game's title appears as it holds a copyright date of 1997. Now, the world begins in this gift plane, this white world with a character who seems to have this mask on with legs attached, a little body going on, and it appears to play like some 2.5D game, or at least a 3D platformer type game with a fixed perspective. It appears that the gift plane is home to hundreds of young pets, but at the time of recording, only 48 remain, and that the player should visit these 8 homes and take home some friends, quote-unquote. Moving forward, a place known as Even Care is discovered, and within it a picture of 2 friends, Toneth and Randus, is discovered. It's also in here a teal-like collectible is seen for the first time, and it's a counter that keeps adding up. As you discover inside the building, it's shown that the pets are afraid, and that it's up to you to convince them otherwise. Now, as you move up forward and discover this trophy for Amber being quote-unquote a real champ, it's here you find this jailed creature. Now, these are creatures that you have to trap up and figure out a puzzle to end up always capturing. So, moving forward, you keep seeing more and more of these creatures, and you're supposed to figure out how to keep capturing. Obviously, that's the whole glimpse of it, capturing these different creatures. Now, moving on forward, you can catch the first glimpse of a pause menu, and it lets you view a book of baby names and see a catalog of caught pets, and it sometimes reminds me of the MGS2 death screen when you're playing as Raiden. Now, up until this point, again, it was all just solving puzzles, but once you leave this building, this Even Care, the player comes out of this brick building into the middle of darkness, and it feels wholly different than when the player had come in originally. Eventually, you warp into this basement crawl opening, and soon after that, it's the end of video 1. And then video 2 begins with a crawl door opened. The player tells us that this door even opened on its own.
Hey, so, the door opened on its own. I was just in the other room for a couple of minutes, and I came back and the door was open.
Now, as the player heads down, they descend into this dark room with some odd objects on the left. It almost appears that whatever item gets picked up, regardless of how it looks, always gets caught into this collectible meter that we had seen earlier. Now, as you move through this underground area, you find that this office room with a ringing phone saying that Care has left the room. Now, a paper to the right showcases 3 portraits of a girl, one with straight hair, one with ragged, and one hiding her face. Now, the following words are A, B, and NLM. Moving forward, you can see a shot of a home with a dark green light reflecting off. Then you can see an apartment building, then a windmill. And then we leave this long pathway where you're seeing all this stuff to an area where you see buildings that have eyes, and it's almost to the point where it's interactable. And when you interact, you get a note saying that the person known as Michael Hammond, with a date following saying 1988, 1995, obviously signifying birth and death, and then stating that Mike was a gift. Moving into the building, you can see that there's a big sunflower inside, and you can pull each petal out, and the flower descends with each pulled petal, signifying that as each petal is pulled, that there is something dark occurring, something is being pulled down and ultimately destroyed. Now, descending further, you can come across this girl with her hands covered, similar to the photo we saw earlier in the office area, but the only difference here is that you're not really seeing any facial features with this. Pulling those remaining petals that you were once pulling away, you see this girl have this rope presumably hanging from her neck, this time as you go back. The sprite seems to have, again, no facial features. This is one thing that you had seen initially covered up just with their hands, again similar to the NLM face that we had seen earlier in the office, but this time you don't see any facial features at all, even though the hands are moved away. As you go further, you can see that you come across a character, you can ask questions. Now, this is considered to be an AI, or an entity that is always changing as the game progresses. Now, again, this is kind of weird to consider in a PlayStation 1 game, and it's technically infeasible, but we'll look at that a little later. Now, you can ask this myriad of questions. Some of the questions asked over here are pretty simple, things such as, who are you, where am I, things like that. Questions that you would expect to be generally coded in and given standard responses back to. The game then cuts to a windmill scene earlier. The entity met earlier, though, this time says to keep watching that windmill. Past that, you come across a creature that looks poorly drawn, they mirror the player's movements, and that's about everything substantial in Video 2. Video 3, you come across a game getting even darker, it seems. Phrases such as "good grief," "alas" appear on the walls, and areas become darker compared to the last. Moving forward, you encounter this puzzle where you see this eye and then it leads to a face, and you're basically drawing it, and it actually makes no sense to me. But it goes as far as to having eyebrow expressions and noses. It's a very complex puzzle that Paul seems to figure out with relative ease almost. Then you can see a room which has ambient lighting. I feel at this point it's a little too advanced for the PlayStation 1, almost like this would never really be happening in any system at least no PlayStation 1 game that I've personally played. The way it's casting into various elements, you got a table that has this Rubik's Cube on it, several camera zooms occur, and the game cuts to the same room with whitish green, and things sort of change around. You see an original Game Boy, then you get to the purple room, and the cube is back again alongside Play-Doh. Colors change, items on the desk change, that's about it. Sooner or later, you'll discover this item is actually Care's bedroom, the little girl that is mentioned up to this point. Now, moving on, you encounter a pretty dark text box, which indicates Care isn't growing. You say that there's a puzzle, you're excited in your bathtub thinking which child to pick next, and then you see her limping from the darkness, and eventually you see the words, "You'll shoot her in the head." Tiara is mentioned, and young people can be psychologically damaged beyond rebirthing, which is the mentioning of rebirthing entirely, which we'll look at much later. A theory that we will look at. Details of this lonesome person entering a Newmaker plane. At this point, it goes far beyond just being a PS1 game. At this point, an entire story is mentioned involving rebirthing, abuse, implications of kidnapping even, and psychological issues just from a PS1 game, and it jumps and spikes up far beyond what I had expected. Now, moving on to Video 4, you leave this crawl space, you're walking into this dark field, and that's about it. Video 4 isn't really that exciting, it's also incredibly short. Video 5 begins, and the player descends down a ramp in what appears to be the interior of a building, the building where they found the same AI-like entity earlier. They asked him questions, they asked him who is Tiara, and the response is Petscop Kid. Very smart. Then the question asked is who am I, and the response is being Newmaker, referencing the name to the plane we saw in Video 3. Then the question is asked, where am I? With the response being this time under the Newmaker plane. Then the fourth question asked is, who are you? Which responds with, nothing. Nah, I'm just kidding. You get the game telling you to turn off the PlayStation, breaking the fourth wall-like deal, because apparently the entity is hurt whenever the PlayStation is on. Asking the question again shows the response tool with a pointer pen-like object. The last question asked is, remember being born? Again, almost referencing the whole idea of rebirthing, which responds to, I'm not Tiara, mentioning the girl we could almost look at in a bit later in the theory section of this. Now, video 6 begins with the shot of the windmill, and apparently for almost 3 hours the site remains absolutely the same. At about 2 hours and 30 minutes, though, of this capture supposedly, a shadow is seen moving around the windmill. A minute later, the figure, still shrouded in darkness, you cannot see it, walks right up to the camera. Next scene is an outline of a CD with a pink background. Then the game cuts back to the field with these word blocks spelling out "Where is my house?" The game builds random objects, and it's revealed that the apartment that I had initially referenced earlier turns out to be a school. Another phrase is spelled out that reads out, "I will follow." Panning back to the windmill for about an hour, it seems, an hour and a half of just repetitive capture, the windmill then just disappears. The game then cuts back to the character walking away from the location of the entity it asked questions to. Now, after roaming around, we see the pause screen again, second time in my opinion here. We go to the pet screen and select Toneth. The description tells us it's a bird, a quote from Mike detailing funny, stupid blob monster, and to catch Randus first. And then details an event of a bird having a broken leg, and at this point the text goes past the bounds of the message box to the point where it just goes off the screen entirely. And this is one of those signs of it being a totally unfinished game, and it's about almost the only sign, because to me it seems like the game is pretty damn finished considering how much of the game is so stable. Now, we go back to this entity, ask the question, "Where is the house?" only to be told that they'll never be able to leave. We then ask, "Where is the school?" and we told that we could not go back in time. At this point, the ARG creator again believes that this is an AI communicating with them, which I disagree, because this is a PS1 game and the system already has these severe technical limitations. Adding an AI is impossible, an AI like this. Of course, if you just went with the idea of it being general questions like "Where is Tiara?" "Where is this?" "Where is blah blah?" which are just general questions, then the responses make sense. But up to this point, we haven't really seen the game saving or doing anything different, or writing data, or progressing through levels, so it is a little bit odd that it is acting this way. It is too unnatural for it to be just a PlayStation game. Now, video 7 begins with this reflective room that we had seen earlier. A note on the wall reads, "Come here," reversed on the camera, and the player heads back to this AI, which we'll call the entity at this point, and upon seeing it, it says, "I love you, Newmaker. Please show Marvin where his house is." Now, the player asks, "Who are you?" again to be told, "Go there, he'll follow you, his daughter is there." The second question asked is, "Remember being born?" which invokes the response, "Also wants 1,000 pieces for machine beyond basement stairway." The pieces, I personally believe, are just those collectibles we've been picking up throughout the course of the videos, and again, we haven't picked up near 1,000 of them up until this point. It's also to notice that every pet entry at this point now just says "Child Library accepts people." We go see the same pie puzzle again, which is still pretty cryptic. I don't know how that really works, but we go back to the Rubik's Cube room. This time it's lit yellowish, which the Rubik's Cube room is, of course, Care's room is what I would want to refer to it as. Table has a blue car, and alongside this Rubik's Cube, then you go to the same room, but except it has a purple lighting scheme. This time one of the objects appears to just be this black square, I think edited onto the video through some post-production software. Video 8 begins with a character just walking on a field to the right. Cars are seen driving past. They're crudely animated. It almost seems like they're just teleporting frame by frame. Then we get a new character we follow around the same hallway. We discovered these initial glimpses of the windmill and the school and the green home. And aside from this new character, nothing much more happens. They just follow around, do circles around the player, and bam, that's it. Video 9 begins with the first time using the title screen we've seen in video number 1. The game then loads into this demo mode in the initial Even Care building. You can scrub through the video, and we come to the interior of this windmill, just gears and collectibles. We go back to the same room as before, containing the Rubik's Cube, this time lit more than before. The game mentions it as looking through your things, finding a picture with a friend in front of the windmill from 1977. And as you read further, you find that the friend never came back and the windmill just had disappeared. Moving forward, we come to a room where we have collectibles, large present boxes, and what appears to be a cake. One of the boxes contains a green key. The key, it's used to open another present box and descend into. You heading back to the Even Care building, and in the Pets menu, it's discovered that Care NLM escaped from the school's basement and wandered the Newmaker plane for days. And then through further exploration, you find Care NLM, and end up catching her in the bedroom. So video number 10 begins with the character holding this green key above their head, and the Even Care building, by the way. We've seen this a bunch of times. After exploring the building, we come across this save screen, which I believe is the second time we've really seen this at this point. And it seems that Paul and the backup save, 1 and 3 respectively, have possible corruption, whatever that entails. And the only normal file is technically test. The game loads up to this present box that was open, and we immediately descend down to the Even Care building yet again. We traverse through the building, and we get to this reflective room again, but except this time we're on the opposite side, the left side. The sign that was on the wall is now actually legible, and it's asking us when we remember being born. So then we go back to the AI and we ask what month it is, and we get no answer. It's just a little post-it sticky note deck just rolling back and forth in front of it. We ask what year it is, no answer. And then we ask where the windmill was. And then the most surprising thing really happens. A black box just appears, taking up about 60% of the video. And it just ends. And that's it. Petscop 10. It leaves us on nothing more than a cliffhanger. Alright, and that was about the 10 Petscop videos, and we're waiting on more, sometime this year of course. Now, I can sit here and discuss technical believability and say that it's not a real PS1 game, and of course it isn't. It looks good, it matches resolution, the whole video interpolation, things like interlacing the video. Lighting is often a little too real for me to pass off, though it does remind me of a PS1 game I used to personally play as a child called Fix. Seems like it's an early version of that game's engine. It's one with static controlled cameras even too. Now, what we really need to discuss more so than technical believability, because again, it's like a creepypasta. We know it isn't real. So let's look at what is the story behind this entire, game. Now, the reason why I was never really mentioning Paul in the analysis part of this, or really looking at it through the whole note-taking side of it, is because Paul is a character that I cannot trust. It's unreliable to deal with this individual. There's moments where Paul seems to know a lot of these difficult puzzles right off the bat, but then you get to the point where he's almost completely apathetic to what's going on around him in the game. It just seems like Paul has innate knowledge of what he's playing, but he can almost turn it off at a very convenient time for him. It's almost as if that when we're dealing with something that Paul doesn't really want to discuss about, it's very apathetic in the video, but when it's something that needs to be progressed through, something that obviously is difficult to somebody who would have just, say, found the game, and this would be their first blind playthrough, it's just something that comes across as really weird to somebody like me personally. Being the one to record videos in this format, I can tell when somebody is just keeping things reserved, and to me, it's just something that Paul is reserving for no other reason than he knows more than he's letting on. Now, we're going to look at the most commonly accepted theory for this, and this is the Candace Newmaker theory, and this is a pretty dark theory itself. Basically revolves around a individual known as Candace Tiara Elmore, renamed legally to Candace Elizabeth Newmaker. She was a child that died at the age of 10, just 10. And what happened was that she died in this extreme attachment therapy session to treat RAD. Basically, Candace was put into this 2-week therapy session to treat reactive attachment disorder. And for those of you who don't know what reactive attachment disorder is, it's a situation where a child will have these disturbed and often severally inappropriate ways of attributing social cues or connections to common contexts, many contexts in general. And it really comes from a failure of forming natural connections to children, or from the child to the primary caregivers. In this case, we'll call it her official parents. Now, early in the childhood, it obviously can stem from neglect, it can stem from abuse, which is what happened in this case in particular. Sometimes it can come from parents just separating at such an early age in life that those connections are never ingrained in. Candace and Jean Newmaker, who's a single mother who actually adopted the child, had begun to face several behavioral issues with Candace in of herself. Basically, at first she just gave her medication to really just see if that could subside what was going on, but when she had apparently started to kill goldfish with matches, or at least playing with matches to an extent, things had to really be done. We had to have some form of interjection. So going through thousands upon thousands of dollars of regression therapy courses at this moment in time, Candace was put through this therapy program where she was put into sheets, and she was pressed on by multiple adults. Now, what I'm discussing here is a process known as rebirthing. It's a very controversial pseudoscience, so to speak, where it's there to really invigorate the feeling of being born again by being put through a birth canal, by forming that connection right from the start, forcing it in. Now, I don't have to tell you this because I'm not a medical professional. I shouldn't really have much knowledge on this, but what I can say is, being as somebody who can look at it from a very logical perspective. Obviously, there's a reason we don't remember things such as coming out of our mother's birth canal or experiencing those very early memories in our childhood. It's because those memories don't really need to be experienced. They're latently injected. And regardless of being born, you're only really born once, and by forcing it again, it's not going to re-ingrain a memory into your head that you want in. It's only going to really push the child to a much more traumatic state, which is what happened here. Because for 70 minutes, Candace was basically she was basically wrapped around in darkness. She was pressed on by adults. She was essentially suffocating for an hour and 10 minutes straight, to the point where no matter how many times she had protested, the actual people who were administering this therapy didn't really care about the situation at all. They had basically just told her she could choose to die or go through this birth canal. Unfortunately, Candace in fact died, and this became a national event in the United States. In fact, this whole idea of therapy, which was already considered a pseudoscience by many, many, many doctors out there already, was turned into law, basically to a point where you couldn't reenact certain things like this. You couldn't reenact this therapy because of what it had led to. I mean, obviously, when a 10-year-old girl dies after being suffocated for 70 minutes, being forced to go through a artificial birth canal, anybody can consider the fact that it is almost psychotic to even think of a situation in the first place, regardless of how much you would attribute it to it. Now, I, however, think beyond this theory, which, it's a theory and it's an actual event that occurred, is my perspective is Paul really knows more about this game than he lets on, and I believe that if we can take ourselves to the day of when this therapy was being performed, I'm a firm believer of there being multiple sides to everything. Now, obviously, a child died here, but I think the experiences and feelings of everybody in that room must have been a trigger to something far more, must have been different to everyone involved in it. Obviously, I feel that Paul is an individual who I will argue that has innate knowledge about this game, which is why I argue that Paul himself has made this game. Nobody else owns a copy of Petscop, and nobody else really should. But for Paul to come across a game where he's playing it for the first time, coming across innate knowledge, playing apathetically, I almost feel that Paul himself had made this game as a form of confession to us, as a form of giving us, those who really look at it analytically, a whole picture of what actually happened that day, what happened during that particular regression therapy leading up to the death of Candace, what really occurred. Obviously, there's many theories you can apply to this entire story. There's many technical theories you can put, and there's many story theories you can attribute to this whole situation anyways. But one thing that I really argue is Paul definitely knew a lot more than he let on. And I think Paul ultimately faces some guilt in being related, or maybe possibly even part of the situation, being one of those adults, or being potentially in the same room, or even knowing that something like this occurred and being unable to stop it, leading to the events of a 10-year-old girl being killed. Now, there are situations where the entire Candace theory can basically be put away, and a lot of people argue that because the copyright date of the title screen dictates 1997 and the death of Candace being in 2000, that the developers of the game obviously could not have known what had happened. I, however, argue that copyright dates don't really matter. I feel like I could always put in a date in anything that I produce and say this was copyrighted in 1923. It doesn't mean it was copyrighted in 1923 or whatever year I decide. I think if somebody wanted to cover their tracks and create a distant way to tell us the reality of a story, in this case, I think Paul might have made it any date he might have chosen, but at the end of the day, it was a story that would have been passed to us. However, there's a billion theories about this. My theory is that Paul himself knows a lot more, but it's a theory that I can only leave at a theory, because this ARG isn't finished yet, and until it's finished, we won't know the whole story entirely. And hopefully it will finish sometime soon, or at least devolve even further and further, because as an ARG, it's definitely one of the more exciting videos out on the internet at this moment in time. It's a PS1 game that we all really want to play, but ultimately we know it doesn't exist. But the story behind it is something we really want to see play out, because in the end, it's something you can't really ignore. That being said, I'm going to end exactly what I'm talking about over here and really finish out my analysis. I don't have much more to say other than go give Petscop a chance. Go to this YouTube channel, subscribe to it, give these videos a watch, and be sure to watch out for Petscop 11. Let me know what you thought about this haunted gaming. If you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Just like if you dislike it. This is me, Mudahar, and I am out.